voice worth the money? Well, we do tone of voice, so we obviously have our own opinion about that. So we thought it would be a good idea to get an independent research company involved. So we commissioned Illuma Research to go and talk to some people across the UK. They spoke to 197 people in different businesses around the UK. All of them were involved in verbal or visual identity in some way or another. About half had a tone of voice, half didn't. That is a visual representation of half and half, just in case any of us were feeling unclear. So that's what these results are based on. So, what to tell you? So this was the question that we asked them then. This was one of the many questions we asked. Did you get value from your tone of voice? And the results here, I think, are really, really interesting. So most people felt that they got value from tone of voice to a fair extent. But honestly, probably not quite as many people as we might have thought were saying we got a really, really great value from tone of voice. So that got us thinking, what is that about? And the answer to that question from the beginning, is tone of voice worth it? We think it's this. We think yes, obviously, if you do it right. Okay, so there are some key things that you can do that will help tone of voice be properly worth the money, be properly good value. And I'm going to share them with you because, you know, it would be a bit rude if I didn't, if I stopped there. So I'm going to share with you 5 things that we think, based on this research, based on everything that we know about doing tone of voice for the last decade or so with businesses around the world. Okay, thing number 1, get the chief executive involved, get the senior people involved, and do it as early as you can. So obviously, as Tina mentioned, that was great at Santander because they had somebody who was essentially giving them the brief. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it might be a bit of work for you to do. Why is this helpful, important? Well, this was a really interesting finding for us from the research. We asked people, what kicked off your tone of voice research? What made it happen? Now, the top result there is all about a rebrand. So you'd expect that, wouldn't you? Of course, if you're rebranding a visual identity, if you're looking at everything, of course you might look at your tone of voice. But we were quite surprised at how high it came out for a new chief executive. And we have some theories on this. We think that this is because once a chief executive comes in, obviously they're interested in that bit about changing a business, about culture change. And we know that tone of voice and language, from what we've heard here and from what we've experienced ourselves, is one of the really big ways that you can do that. Because not everybody in the business will ever get involved in the precise sizing of a logo, but everybody in your business will be writing. So we think that new chief executives, senior people, are generally quite excited by tone of voice. They're likely to, if they're coming in new, they're likely to have seen it in other places as well. Those senior people then, they do recognise the value, okay? So they're up for it. So more than 70% are saying that they recognise the value of tone of voice. In fact, 39% say that they are engaged with tone of voice to a great extent. Now, it might not seem like that big a number, but if you think about the senior people that you work with, how many of them get really excited about brand and marketing projects? Probably all of them all the time, I don't know. But we thought like that 39% engaged to a great extent for tone of voice was quite an interesting one. Again, once people start to see the effects, they really buy into it. So the more you can work with your chief exec, the more you can work with your senior people, we think that really helps a tone of voice do its job. Okay. Thing number 2, be ambitious. So it's really easy to think about tone of voice as a brand project, as a marketing project, but actually, as we've sort of heard a little bit from our speakers already, it gets everywhere, everywhere. So again, more than 90% of the people that we spoke to who had a tone of voice said that it was being used in most or all of the functions in their business. Most or all. Now, that was really interesting for us. There were just a few, there was just a really small minority who said, well, it's only really marketing and comms. Nearly everybody we spoke to said this is getting used across the business. So that was really exciting for us because we kind of think, again, it's that brand by stealth bit that you can do really well. Is it as important as your visual identity? Now, you know, I think the day is long past where we have to make a case for having a really good visual identity. Tone of voice is much newer, I think. It's not quite mainstream. It's sort of teetering on the brink of being mainstream. And yet, more than 65% of people were saying that it's as important, or even in some cases more important than visual identity. So I think it's just back to that point that tone of voice is becoming more and more important for brands, more and more interesting for people as they start to look at how they can shift how people see their business. Okay, spend some money on it. Well, we would say this, wouldn't we? But independent research. We asked people who didn't have a tone of voice already how much they thought it might cost if they were going to develop one. Can you guess how much they thought? Anyone like to hazard a guess? 10 million?
Someone give her a piece of paper and
I'll give you my card. No, okay, so people who didn't have a tone of voice thought it would cost them around £73,000. People who did have a tone of voice, who could actually tell us how much they had spent on it, the average came out as this. That's quite a big number. That's quite a big number. But typically, businesses don't come to us or to people like us and say, right, here is £100,016, please create a tone of voice. That's not how it works. It tends to be a project that grows and develops. And as we say, as it gets into other bits of the business, that's where we can kind of see impact across everywhere. So a bit more specifically, we looked at different sectors and how much they were spending. Perhaps unsurprisingly, with that FS up there in front, leading the way, spending around 146k on their tone of voice. Telecoms not too far behind. Again, these findings are probably fairly intuitive. If you're in a crowded market, if your marketing products and services are quite intangible, quite difficult to see and grasp, it's not surprising that you need to invest a bit more in brand and invest a bit more in tone of voice. These were the reasons that we asked, why did you actually do this? And that kind of relevant customer comms, like getting your message across to customers at every bit of the journey. And then again, that bit that's about differentiating yourself from other businesses. So those were the top two reasons. With that in mind, I don't think it's too surprising that FS, telecoms, energy utilities are the kind of businesses that are spending the most. Okay, thing number 4, review it. Again, it feels like a bit of a no-brainer, and yet it's really funny, isn't it? It's like, well, we've got our tone of voice. Yep, we've got our tone of voice. Yep, it's in our brand book. Yep, it's really good. We really like it. 10 years go by, the world changes, and we're still saying the same things. So when we asked people who had a tone of voice, would you do it again? Pretty much all of them said that they would. They would definitely or probably be doing their tone of voice again. We asked them how often they thought they would need to refresh it. And the number that kind of kept coming back to us, and this is true for people who didn't have a tone of voice as well, actually. They were saying the same thing. They all reckoned about every 5 years was about the right amount of time, which figures, I think, because, the pace of change that we're seeing in markets, it's not surprising that you need to come back to it. And I think we've talked a little bit about that idea that maybe you have a kind of reasonably short-term tone of voice. You have the tone of voice that gets you from one place to another, that moves you into being perhaps a bit more human. After 5 years, you can afford to be a bit more aspirational. You can afford to do slightly different things with it. So I think that's a really interesting one, making sure that you keep an eye on what's happening and keeping an eye on your competitors as well and how things are looking and sounding in the market. Okay, thing number 5. So the writer, a tone of voice agency, is recommending that you use a specialist tone of voice agency. I know. But look, this is what happened. When we asked people, if you were going to do your tone of voice again, who would you use? And the only number that went up was for the people who looked at specialist tone of voice agency. Why is that? Is it just because we're brilliant? Well, we think it's this. We think that if you think about tone of voice as a program, as a project, as a way of creating culture change, it's probably not surprising that having people who are specialists will help you. A thing that, we've touched on this already, a thing that often happens for us is that people ring us up and they say, look, we've got a tone of voice, it's 2 pages in a brand book, no one's using it, no one cares, what do we do? And we're the people who are probably quite good at coming in and helping you sort that out. Because we see lots of tone of voice materials that say things like, be bold, but not arrogant, be friendly, but not patronising. And all these ideas are probably great ideas and very helpful and very in tune with your brand. But when you go and sit down at your computer to write your board report or whatever, and you're inwardly thinking, I need to be bold, but not arrogant, and I need to be friendly, but, it can be a bit tricky. It can be a bit tricky. There can be a lot going on. So how do you make it really practical? How do you make it stick? I think that's the bit that we're probably the most interested and excited about when it comes to thinking about tone of voice. Okay, what's my next slide? So yeah, this came out of, we did a little bit of qualitative research alongside, got that word, good, alongside, and we asked some people what they thought about it, and I think this just backs it up. You know, people have get their tone of voice projects, but it can be hard to make it land unless you spend a bit of time, a bit of money, a bit of effort really, getting people around the business enthused and excited.